Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Southworth Author Series. Tonight, we are very happy to be joined by Don Snyder from his home in Scarborough, Maine, on the beautiful coast of Maine. Don is the author of many, many novels and nonfiction books. He won a James A. Michener Fellowship for his first novel, Veterans Park, and wrote the 2003 Hallmark Hall of Fame movie, Fallen Angel, which was based on his novel and starred Jolie Richardson and Gary Sinise. For the last 18 years, he's been working on the screenplay adaptation of his book of Time and Memory, which tells the story of his 19-year-old mother, who died 16 days after giving birth to Don and his twin brother, a tragedy that was kept secret from him for most of his life. Most recently, Don published Walking with Jack, a book about caddying for his long-hitting son on a professional golf mini tour down in Texas. Don is also the founder of the Caddy School for Soldiers, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to help combat veterans from the US, UK, and Canada recover from their physical injuries and PTSD and regain their belief in themselves and their futures by exploring a new career as professional caddies, which is a terrific cause and one that I know that has been very dear to your heart, Don. Don, thank you for joining us. I know you're going to be reading from one of your novels that was set in St. Andrews called Winter Dreams. Take it away.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, I'm up here. Welcome to all of you. I'm up here in Maine, where I live, and the golf courses have just opened here this probably 5 days ago. So that's a good sign that we're coming out of the shutdown. I hope you're all well, and I hope many of you had a chance to play some golf today somewhere. So I'm guessing that some of you have probably been to St. Andrews, Scotland, to the old course, that you've gone there with friends or family members. Maybe it was a trip that you looked forward to for many years. Maybe some of you are still looking forward to it and haven't been there. But when in 2002, it was like the late fall of 2002. I had never been to St. Andrews, Scotland. I had heard of the old course. I knew very little about the history of the game. But I had a chance. My publisher in New York, Doubleday, basically said, what do you want to write your next novel about? And at that time, my son Jack, in 2002, was like 13 years old, and he had fallen in love with golf. And he and I were spending a lot of time together on a golf course here, a little public course. And I just said to my editor, I think I'd like to go to Scotland and write a novel that's set at the old course in St. Andrews. And he said, great. So I got to spend 2 months that winter, February and March, living in the Russax Hotel. And some of you are familiar with that hotel that looks out on the 1st and 18th fairway of the old course. I was in room 313, and I began writing a novel there called Winter Dreams. Now, when I flew over to Scotland, the overnight flight, I was so excited to get out on the old course for the first time. It was a Saturday, late in the afternoon, when I finally arrived in St. Andrews. I flew into Edinburgh, took the bus up to St. Andrews, and I kept on my feet the thick woolen socks that I had worn on the airplane on the flight over and jammed them into my foot-joint golf shoes. And off I went. I was the last person out. I remember the starter was sort of hesitant, like, I don't know if there's enough time. Go ahead. So I told him, I had to play. He said, go ahead. So when I finished that first round in the old course, I had these huge blisters on the back of my heels. My golf shoes were actually filled with blood by the time I finished. And so there I was now in St. Andrews and wanting to play the old course every single day that it was open. It's not open on Sundays, as you know. But I couldn't get my feet in shoes. So this is a true story. I took a taxi with in my socks to a clothing store on Market Street, and I bought a pair of slippers that were they were sort of like felt slippers, but they had rubber soles on the bottom, and on embossed on the top was a gold crown. I remember some sort of insignia. And I played the old course for the next week in my bedroom slippers. And there are still people there, not the starter because he's retired, I think, but there are still people there working on that course. Some of the rangers that will remember the crazy American who came over and played the old course in his bedroom slippers in the dead of winter. And by the end of the first week, I could get back into my shoes. So anyway, I would get up at my standard time, 4:30 in the morning, make some coffee, and start writing. And basically, it was at the beginning when you're writing a novel, starting from scratch. You have no plot, you have no characters, you have nothing. You're waiting to hear a voice um, that becomes the voice of the novel, the narrator's voice, the voice that's going to carry you into the story, and you hope that's strong enough to carry the story in a meaningful way to readers someday. Though, of course, beginning the novel in 2002, you know you're looking down a long road. It was published. I didn't finish it till 2000 and end of 2003. It was published in 2004. But anyway, that first day, that first morning in Scotland, 4:30 in the morning, make your coffee, sit in the big wing chair, push the chair up in front of the window so you can watch the first light, of morning rising up off the sea. And then you're waiting to hear a voice. And this is the voice I heard. I'm only going to read, I'll probably just read the prologue, see how much, it's only 6 pages. Maybe I'll read the first chapter too. But anyway, so this is what I began writing there, the prologue. The summer I turned 12 years old, the Wilcox Tannery went out of business, putting 50 families in Westport, Illinois, out of work, and laying abandoned the long brick outbuildings that stood beyond the east border of St. Luke's orphanage. Brother Martin, a young Benedictine priest from a small town somewhere in Florida, who taught us literature and composition, ran the kitchen and always had 5 or 6 of us working with him to prepare meals and wash pots. He had given up golf when he took his vows, but in his tiny office across from the ovens, an office with wire mesh walls like a cage and shelves of canned food, he kept the trophies he'd won in amateur competition, along with 24 golf balls and a Wheeling's Mill flour sack, and a 3-wood with a head made of polished hickory and inlaid strips of persimmon. Nothing in an orphanage is as inestimable as history, because it was the one thing each of us lacked and desperately longed to know. There were no limits to the personal histories that we invented. One boy claimed to have been abandoned by a mother who drowned herself after finishing the 6th runner-up in a Miss America pageant in Atlantic City. Another swore his mother had been decapitated while on a safari in the Congo. Our fathers, we insisted, were still alive. They were bankers and engineers, railroad tycoons and ventriloquists, men who, by implication, were too busy to raise us themselves. But after they met new wives whose beauty and resourcefulness matched that of our lost mothers, they would come for us at St. Luke's some fine Sunday afternoon in our imaginations. All the lies about love took their toll, and by the time we were teenagers, we didn't believe anything, especially stories that assigned manly, real-world qualities and experiences to the brothers who cared for us and whom we, as we grew older, showered with ingratitude. But the summer that the tannery was abandoned, I was young enough to believe urgently that the trophies in Brother Martin's office had been presented to him for astonishing enterprises at a time in his life before he dressed in the shapeless black robe of the Benedictine brothers, when his future was a brilliant, shining promise, and he still wore pants. I defended him to the unbelievers and suffered my first bloody nose from an older boy named Kravitz when I refused to repeat after him that Brother Martin was a queer. At night, often under moonlight, Brother Martin stood outside by the picnic table behind the kitchen and hit golf balls over the grassy meadow that divided the orphanage from the tannery, launching each ball into a glorious flight across the starlit sky. Before each shot, he would play the part of a radio announcer narrating a golf match. Ladies and gentlemen, a very difficult shot here facing Gene Saracen. His ball is nearly buried in the first cut of rough on a downhill lie. He's likely to hit a flyer from here. It's a shot that appears certain to jeopardize his slim two-stroke lead. Brother Martin could narrate these stories with various accents. Slow, deep Southern, and British snob were my favorites. And though we didn't know it at the time, these moments he recounted before each shot were taken from championships of the past, moments that introduced us to the great golfers of the ages, Gene Saracen, Ben Hogan, Harry Vardon, and the matchless Bobby Jones. We loved these performances and waited with delight for that moment after every swing when Brother Martin would raise his hand in the air for silence just before the ball made a marvelous whacking sound as it ricocheted off the brick flank of the dark tannery building and disappeared into the night. That began a long stretch of time in my life when I looked forward to nothing more than the chance to hit golf balls behind the kitchen with Brother Martin. He devised a game where he would hit all 24 balls and then send us out into the meadow like Labrador retrievers to find them. Whichever boy found the most would have the chance to hit next, while Brother Martin made suggestions about the grip, the stance, the position of the hands at take back, and the tempo of the swing. He himself possessed a beautiful flowing swing that gathered ferocious power from a synchronized, effortless, and perfectly timed unwinding of his hips and shoulders and a snapping of his wrists, and we all worked hard to catch its rhythm and to imitate it. In the years he shared with us before he was transferred to a prison somewhere in Texas, Brother Martin pressed upon each of us the idea that the majesty of God was revealed in the rhythms of the world, from the way a baby learns to crawl and then stand to the changing seasons. He reached even the teenage hoods who smoked cigarettes on the back steps of the metal shop and glared at the world with bored, superior expressions. In time, they too took part in hitting and chasing after golf balls, and could be heard arguing over the great Scottish golfer Sandy Hurd, who he had beaten for the British Open title at Hoylake in 1902. I was one of the boys who never learned the proper swing, plagued with a terrible flaw that sent all my balls flying off miserably to the right. For all the times I tried, I never struck a single ball well enough to carry it on a straight line across the distance to the tannery wall. I hung my head after each swing and then tried again with Brother Martin's encouragement. He never gave up on me, and though his instruction was wasted on me, I think I became a teacher because of him. Looking back, I see that his gift to us was the way he took us seriously, always encouraging us to dream about what we might become in the world, and using the time we shared with him to tell us things about life that I've never forgotten and that still retain a certain resonance and fitness in my memory. I am 50 years old now as I write this, but I remember as if it were last night, an evening under moonlight when he paused before a shot to tell us that we would all fall in love someday. And then you will understand, boys, he said, as he cocked his thin wrists, that every love story is a small boat set upon an open sea. And those things that imperil it The winds of betrayal, the waves of fear and doubt are also what earn its dignity in our memory. A dented green sedan took Brother Martin away from us, off to his next assignment and the rest of his life. It was a late autumn morning. Leaves blew around the orphanage courtyard, and when he was gone, I felt trapped inside a hollow space. This would have been just before I turned 13 and joined the hoods on the steps of the metal shop, where we pretended nothing mattered to us as we steeled ourselves against the next person who would vanish from our lives. The night before, long after dinner was finished, after the last of the pots had been washed and we were supposed to be asleep on our cots, I found Brother Martin out beyond the kitchen swinging his golf club. He looked different in some way, and it wasn't until I was a man myself that I realized he had been crying. Before we went inside, he told me that I was going to want to play golf someday. At times, when you're confused or lost, you're going to want to play this game, he said. Trust me, you will. He stood behind me and ran his hand the length of my left arm. For a righty, he said, the most important thing is to keep the left arm completely straight on the take back. If you forget everything else that anyone teaches you about the swing, just remember, keep your left arm straight and you'll have a decent chance. Here, pretend you can't bend your arm at all. Pretend your elbow doesn't work. I tried a few swings, which failed to win his praise. Well, he said apologetically, you'll catch on in time. I'll keep practicing, I promised. He nodded, then paused and looked up at the sky. Some scientists say we're made out of stardust. Did you know that? No, sir, I said. I stared at the stars while he went on. You need to become a reader, he said thoughtfully. Books will help you navigate your way through the world. All the great authors have wrestled with the questions about life that will confront you. Who are you reading now? Just my school books, I admitted. How old are you? 13. Perfect for Jack London, he concluded. 8 more years and you'll be ready for Thomas Wolfe. He smiled at this thought. Coming from this place, being on your own in the world, you're different from most people. What you accomplish will belong to you and no one else. And you'll make mistakes. That's all right. Mistakes are good. You'll fall in love easily. You'll depend upon friendship more than most people do, and you'll be disappointed. That's all part of life. Learn to rely on books to carry you through the lonely times. Books and golf. Both will bring you comfort. When we were back inside the kitchen, he sat at his desk and wrote names on a piece of paper for me. Not the titles of the books he loved, but the names of their authors. Read everything they've written, he said, as he handed me the list, shook my hand, and wished me well. I had already turned to leave when he called to me. One more thing, he said. I want to give you something else. It was a handsome bronze cup mounted on a piece of mahogany, one of his golf trophies. I was embarrassed, of course, awkward, as I held the trophy in my hands. But an orphan, like survivors of the Great Depression and other catastrophes, finds it impossible to turn down charity and to walk away from anything he might put to some use after the next disaster strikes. Take these too, he said to me, reaching for his golf club and the balls in the flour sack. I started to thank him, but he raised a hand to stop me. No, I'm thanking you for taking them from me. I've had a lifelong battle against my addiction to golf. I'm going to make a clean start in Texas. No golf to get between me and the Lord's work. He handed the club and balls to me, telling me to keep them for good luck, as if he knew that I would need good luck, as if he knew that I would be lost for much of my life, led by the reckless longing of my heart down a narrow path of sorrow and despair, cursed and blessed and haunted by the story I am telling you now. It is one of those love stories that Brother Martin spoke about. And the sea I set it upon with these words, lies far beyond our diminished hopes, in the vast open silence that holds everything we have not yet learned. That's the end. Are you still there, Dave?
I am, Don. Thank you so much. That's a wonderful prologue, and I know from reading the book what happens next and through the rest of the book. One question I've always wanted to ask you about Winter Dreams, and I know it's not autobiographical; it's a novel. But is the fact that that you chose an orphan to be the protagonist meant to relate to the fact that as we play golf, we're all kind of orphans on the golf course, aren't we? We're on our own. It's us against nature, against the course, against the elements.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that there's a loneliness that sets in. The solitude, the loneliness of it. Absolutely, Dave. Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the things that I can't really tell you why I would set the beginning of this novel in an orphanage. It's just that that was the voice that I heard. It was the dead of winter over there in Scotland. I was alone, away from my family, my 4 children, my wife. And there's a loneliness that sets in when you start out on that journey to write a new novel, a fear. Yeah, but you're right. It's very true. It seems to match the metaphysics of the game.
Right. And I was struck by the passage, books and golf, they will bring you comfort. And books and golf have been at, the center of your life for a long time now, right up until, up to and including present day. But before we get to talking about the Caddy School for Soldiers, I wanted to go back to your latest book, Walking with Jack, and wondered if you could talk a little bit about that book, which was one of the things that struck me about it was, how completely honest you were about the difficulties of caddying for your son on a pro golf tour and living in the same, hotel room with him during that time and traveling from event to event. And you didn't
Mhm.
pull any punches. It was all right there, on the page.
Right. Yeah, so I should say this. When I was over there in Scotland living in the Russax Hotel at the Old Course and writing this novel, I had no idea that I would ever go back to Scotland. I had no idea that I would ever caddy for my son. When my little boy Jack was 5, I put a golf club in his hands for the first time out in the backyard here, and he hit a ball, and the club, the head of the club broke and flew off. And I remember he was just so thrilled. The ball went a long ways too. And I just happened to make one of those promises that we make as a father. I said, if you ever get any good enough at this game to play in a pro tour, I'll be your caddy. Most of those promises we never are really held to, except I did have a daughter who I promised we'd have a batch of puppies, and she held me to it. So we had 9 golden retrievers born in the living room here. But anyway, Jack went off to college, and he had a chance to make the University of Toledo golf team as a walk-on. No one else was interested in him really coming from Maine. They gave him a chance. It's a great story. He got a job. He graduated from high school in Maine, took a bus out to Toledo, Ohio, got a job working in the bag room at the Inverness Club, where Jack Nicklaus had played his first U.S. Open, that famous club, and contacted the coach for the golf team. And the assistant coach came out one day and said, said the head pro, David Graff, said, "You got a kid working here from Maine. Can you give him the morning off so I can play golf with him someday this week?" And he did. And Jack birdied 4 of the first 6 holes. And the assistant coach said, "Okay, what size shirt do you wear? You're on the team." And that was when I began to realize that Jack really was taking it seriously, had a talent, and might one day want to play on a pro tour. So I went back to Scotland in 2008. That'd be 6 years after I was there writing this novel. And I went to Davy Gilchrist, who was the caddy master at King's Barnes, because someone had given me his name, and he hired me. I was 58 years old, and I worked that season as a caddy at King's Barnes. Then one more season for the Links Trust when I turned 60. And then I was prepared. I felt that I had been properly trained by those brilliant Scottish caddies in all those great conditions over there. You work 187 days without taking a day off. That was the deal with Davy at King's Barnes. And I felt prepared, and then I caddied for my son on his first pro tour, which was the Adams Tour in Houston, Texas. Yes, we lived together in the same motel room for 4 months. It was all a privilege, Dave, and it, as I look now that the time has passed, I realize even more what a privilege it was. I mean, how many fathers get to spend that much time with their kids? And it was tough because Jack I had learned as a caddy to to play very conservatively, because I'd seen so much, just slaughter on golf courses. It's a ruinous game for most people, and you learn how to play very cautiously, how to think your way around a course. And Jack, he's 21 years old and he could hit the ball a mile. He would just go for everything. So we sort of were sort of at odds most of the time, but it was a great experience, just great.
And fast forward to 2020, and that same Davy Gilchrist, who was your caddy master back then, is now the caddy master who is helping to train veterans at the Caddy School for Soldiers, which you founded in St. Andrews, and soon to move to the U.S. for an issue there as well. Tell us a bit about how the idea for the Caddy School for Soldiers came to you, and a little bit about your vision for it going forward.
Okay, Dave. Yeah, I'll start at the beginning. The point of origin for the school is really in the 1950s. It's in a small town in Pennsylvania where the World War II soldiers were the fathers of my boyhood. My father was one of them. He came back from the Pacific. He married the girl he loved, the only girl he ever loved. Her name was Peggy. She was 19 years old when they only had 9 months together before she died, 16 days after giving birth to twin sons, and I'm one of those sons. So my father was shattered by her death, and he spent that autumn sleeping on her grave at the Lutheran cemetery. And in the mornings, his buddies who'd gone to war with him took turns coming by the cemetery, taking him to the coffee shop, really just to try to help him talk through his grief. And all his life, my father told me that it was those soldiers who had saved his life. So when I began hearing about soldiers from these last 2 wars taking their lives in staggering numbers, this was just 2 years ago when I first became aware of it, I knew immediately that I wanted to do something to try to lift them from that desolation, that darkness, that loneliness, because in truth, this quarantine that we're living with now, this sort of isolation that many of us are experiencing now for the first time, we've got thousands of soldiers around the world who've been living that way ever since they came home from the war, living in their parents' basement. I mean, there are a lot of reasons for this, but for many of them, it's just the terrible loneliness that set in. So I had remembered, how meaningful the work was when I was a caddy in Scotland. Because there were days when I was really sort of lost there, away from my family. My children were all grown up now. I really missed my son when he left for school. But out there at work each day, I experienced a healing. So I thought, I want to see if I can give the same healing to soldiers. So with the financial help of 2 individuals, a man from Boston with a passion for golf, plays out of the country club in Brookline, and a man from Chicago who had grown up caddying. They put up the money, and the Kohler family, the Kohler, Wisconsin family, gave us their golf course in St. Andrews, Scotland, the Duke's course. Folds of Honor in America came on board to offer scholarships for the children of every U.S. soldier who graduated from the school. Most important, David Scott, one of only 48 PGA master professionals in the world. He offered to be our director of instruction. And then Davy Gilchrist, my former caddy master, at Kingsbarns, who had twice been voted Caddy Master of the Year in Scotland, offered to be the caddy master and to train our soldiers. I had no contact with Davy in the 9 intervening years, but he immediately said, yes, I want to do this. So the soldiers came to us through these fabulous foundations, organizations that work with veterans. On Course Foundation in the UK and America, the Veteran Golfers Association in America, and Soldier On in Canada. And now I'm also working with the Gary Sinise Foundation. So we've held 2 sessions and trained 13 soldiers from the UK, Canada, and the US to become caddies. 6 of them will be working as full-time caddies as soon as the shutdown lifts from Scotland. 2 will be working for the Links Trust, 4 at the new Dumbarnie course, which will be the most talked about new golf course in the world when it opens. And so our mission in the school is simple, Dave, to give a healing experience to as many soldiers as possible, all living together in this big old stone house on the North Sea for the whole month of February in Scotland. And they become a band of brothers, and they really heal each other. And to find full-time caddy jobs for as many of these soldiers as possible so they can work in a meaningful profession, earning a living and providing a good life for their families. And I've just made a connection with Old Collier in Naples, Florida, which is going to hire our boys to work there in the winter if they want and get them their work visas and everything, which is brilliant. So these soldiers, of course, they make exemplary caddies, and I knew they would because of their loyalty, their physical toughness, and their desire to serve. Caddies are shepherds, right? Leading their golfers across perilous ground. So really, soldiers are made, for this kind of work. And we're going to hold the Kohlers have invited us to hold our first American session out at Whistling Straits right after the Ryder Cup this fall.
That's fantastic. It's such an incredible cause, and I know from talking with you some of the stories of the veterans who have come, and many of them in quite a broken state, almost to the point where they were reluctant to make the leap, to make the commitment to going away for a month and doing that kind of thing. Have emerged with a real newfound sense of belief in themselves. So it's a really terrific program.
That's right. That's right, Dave. They arrive, they sort of like, they have a look in their eye, almost like ghosts. It's like, oh, here they're going off on another deployment far from home. Who's this guy that they're trusting? But then you see them every day rising up. First you see them pick their heads up a little bit, and then as time passes, smiling and laughing, and it's their camaraderie, their band of brothers that lifts them up. But there's also this marvelous equation about working as a caddy. If you're somebody who has lost your belief in yourself, and that's something that I think most of us experience from time to time in our lives, when you're out there earning the trust of a stranger at your side, you begin to get back some belief in yourself. It's just a very simple but profound equation. That's how you earn back your belief in yourself, by earning the trust of someone else, of a stranger. And then there's the healing, of course, that comes from these guys you get to disappear from your own story for 4 or 5 hours and enter into the story of someone else. There's a healing in that as well. But yeah, we've seen a marvelous change in these young men, and I hope that what we can do. Our plan here is to eventually hold 3 sessions a year, one in Canada, one in the US, and the one in Scotland. And there are thousands of these soldiers who need help. And thankfully, all the big new golf courses that are opening, all the great golf courses are using caddies. I mean, you got Stream Song down there in Florida that has a staff of like over 200 caddies. Out at Whistling Straits, the same thing. Mike Kaiser's beautiful operation at Bandon Dunes, the same thing. And the courses that opened up in Cape Breton, Cabot Cliffs, Cabot Links, caddies. what's the other one, Dave? Up there in Wisconsin, Mike Kaiser's other course up
Sand
there.
Valley. Yeah.
Yeah, Sand Valley caddies. So we're training these guys at a time when, and we find them jobs, wherever they want to go. And Dumbarton's going to be amazing for us because it's just down the road, and they're going to, Davey Gilchrist is the caddy master there. David Scott is the general manager. Those are our people. So we'll have an opening there for our soldiers, whoever wants to work in Scotland. And it's just, it's particularly cruel right now that we've got these boys trained and they have to be sitting on their hands because the golf course is closed. I mean, when I left Scotland after the session in February, if anyone had told me this was going to happen, I would have thought it was inconceivable that the golf courses would be closed. But anyway, that is what it is, and we'll pull out of it.
Absolutely. Don, let's open it up to our attendees if there are any questions from people who've been watching.
Cool.
I actually
Anyone
have a
out there?
question. I have a question. You had mentioned earlier that you are also working on a screenplay, and you're waiting for it to be produced. In your dream world, in your best dreams, who would you want to play yourself?
Well, this screenplay is about my mom's story. So it's her love story with my dad, really, which was the book was about. Who would play me? Well, I'm quite young in this most of this script, but I do come back as the son. In the real world, I went searching for their love story. Gee, that's a really good question. You never get to have anything to really say about that. I mean, when I wrote the movie Fallen Angel, I had no idea that Gary Sinise would be cast in the lead, and Jolie Richardson. They were great. Good question. I don't really know. I know that it's a beautiful love story. It's an important story. It would take somebody who has a great sensitivity. We need a really good director as well. I can't really say somebody who could just, play the son searching for the mother who he never knew. I'll have to think about that. Who do you think?
Brad Pitt, for sure.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, he's, God, he was so good in A River Runs Through It, wasn't he? That's one of the movies I watch over and over. How are the Southworth people? How are the Southworth courses doing, Dave? Are they all open now?
They are all open other than Machrihanish Dunes in
Oh,
Scotland, which
right.
remains closed, unfortunately. But the rest are open with, following the proper social distancing protocols and procedures and all of that kind of thing. But at least people are able to get out and, engage in golf and get some exercise. So we're very happy about that.
Good. I'm glad you mentioned Machrihanish Dunes because I actually got to play there. I got to play there in 2010 because I was working for the Links Trust, and the Open was there. So we did actually I actually had 3 days off that season. Very rare for a caddy to have a day off. And I rode the bus down, and man, what a fabulous David McClay kid. I mean, that to me, I can still, I mean, to me, it stands out of all the golf courses I've ever walked on and played, caddied on. There was just something so stunning. It was like being in a dream, really. It was amazing. I loved it.
Does anyone else have a question for Don? If not, Don, I guess one last question I would like to ask you before we let you go is, what are you working on now?
Well, I am trying to get my mother's movie made. I'm working on a new a new novel. It's going to be a Christmas novel, and trying to believe that that it's that it's will be deeply meaningful to people. And part of it will be is set over there in Scotland. Um, so that's what I'm writing every day. And then but for me, the greatest satisfaction I have is when I get to sort of turn away from that and get back to work on details for the caddy school for soldiers. And I spend a lot of time writing to the soldiers and trying to keep their hopes up through this difficult time right now. It's been very tough. But and I'd like to think that as time goes on, I'll be even busier with the caddy school for soldiers. But I'll always have to write, have to write, and try to be able to, try to bring some sort of truth and beauty into the world. That's what it's really all about. And I've been doing it for 43 years now. I can't really imagine not doing it. I'm lucky that I wasn't a bricklayer in my life, because by now my back would be too sore, my legs, I wouldn't be able to do it. But I can still sit here and dream up these stories. That was reading from this book, Dave. I think it was that's the first. I have a note here in the front. When I last read from Winter Dreams was on July 31st, 2005. So it's been quite a while, but it's interesting thing. I can actually remember where I was standing when when I was over there in Scotland and thinking about this novel for the first time. It remains pretty deep in you. Every love story is a small boat set upon an open sea. I can remember walking off the 13th green of the old course at sunset. I think I was the only person. I looked around and there was not another soul. And I was like, wow, this is amazing that this American can fly over here to the oldest, most famous golf course in the world. I'm out here with this beautiful setting sun in a winter evening, and I'm the only person here. And for some reason, that line came into my head. Every love story is a small boat set on an open sea. Isn't that funny?
That reminds me of another story that you tell in Walking with Jack about being caddying on the old course for a gentleman whose wife and son were back in the old course hotel. Do you know the one I'm referring to?
I do, David. Thanks for bringing that up, because this little story that happened to me is illustrative of why I wanted these lost soldiers to have a chance to work as caddies. So it was just, it was the dark hours. I was always one of the caddies who was down there at the end of the day because there was a shortage of caddies. And I met this American man, and off we go. You never know on the first tee what it's going to be like, how you're going to get along. You're just determined to give him the best experience possible, help him get around in the fewest strokes possible. And I think we were on the fourth or fifth hole when he told me that I was telling him about my son, and he said he had a son as well, and that he was autistic, and that it was sad to him that he'd never been able to bring him on a golf course because, his behavior, his conduct, he made loud noises and everything. And we made the turn after the 11th, the par 3, where Bobby Jones hit it into the hill bunker, and ripped up his scorecard and walked off. We make the turn coming back 12 when he happened to say to me, because we pointed in the distance, they said, the old course hotel, that's where my wife and son are staying. And I said, you mean your son is here right now? He says, yeah, he's up there in the hotel with my wife. And I looked around, there was no one behind us. And I said to him, why don't you call and tell your wife to bring him to the 15th tee or the 16th, whatever, those holes that go right along towards the hotel. And, he can take a walk with us. And he did. And the boy was a teenager, and he was his antics were like I remember looking at him just to make these, like a helicopter that had just gone crazy and making all these sounds and everything. But there they went, marching down the fairway together, father and son for the first time. And it was a gift, for me, it was a gift just to be able to witness it. And I really, there are a lot of gifts like that I experienced as a caddy, and they were all in my memory bank. When I thought about these soldiers, I knew that there was something about that work that would give these soldiers some hope and some belief in themselves. And one of the soldiers that I wrote to recently, one of the Canadian boys, I'd sent him a video that I shot in Scotland this winter. We had a gale. We had 17 days of gale winds out of the 28 days we were together. And he wrote back to me and said, I missed the wind and the rain there. It reminded me that I was alive. And there's a lot of, so the physical qualities about it, about the work as well. Yeah, renewal. It's a renewing kind of work. A lot of work that people are forced to do in their lives depletes them. Working as a caddy fills you, renews you, and it also keeps you in very good physical shape too. So there's that benefit as well.
Well, that's a fantastic story, Don, and a very touching one also. I think all of your novels, and I hope that everyone who's attending tonight that hasn't had a chance to read some of your books will choose to do so, because they're all very much loaded with that kind of meaning and emotional depth, and I found them to be fulfilling as a reader.
Well, thank you, David. And the good thing about my books, like Winter Dreams, is you can go online now and buy a hardcover copy for, I think, $0.10.
That's no fair.
You can buy a whole library of my books for very little money now, which is that's
Well,
great.
I hope everyone will do that.
Okay, Dave.
Just real quick before we go, just want to ask once more if there are any other questions from people that are tuning in. If not, Don, we will let you get back to enjoying your evening on the coast of Maine. But thank you so very much for being with us tonight and reading from Winter Dreams and sharing some of those great stories. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you.
Okay, thank you, Dave, and I wish the best to all your people out there. Cheers.
Cheers.